Jumping 2 decades forward, the Soviet Union is gone. The Cold War is over. Step 2 is about to unfold. As the Cold War was dying, the Middle East was heating up and the fighting were as fierce as ever. The US relies heavily on Saudi oil. But more importantly, Saudi money flows into the USA, flooding the country, till Saudi Arabia becomes a top investor in the US. How much of the American national debt Saudi owns? Well, the truth is that I don't know. You don't know either. No one knows, unless they have a serious high-level clearance. Since a law in America passed, in order to hide it from the public. Your guess is as good as mine. But it is my estimation that if Saudi Arabia decides to sell all its dollar reserves at once, a $100 bill will be worth less than the paper it's printed on. For most Americans, this will be a financial doomsday, should that occur. That gave birth to the second step in the anti-American Axis creation. With the Soviets gone, Saudi Arabia needed a new sponsor in their power struggle with Iran and other neighbors. And the US, at that time, was the baddest guy on the block. Saudi Arabia used its oil gains to create sustainable leverage over the world's only superpower. From now on, Saudi power in America is no longer just oil or money. That had become almost unimportant. Under secrecy, Saudi Arabia managed to own a huge chunk of the US financial infrastructure. That means politicians, top business leaders, control over news agencies. In short, the pillars of the American democracy itself. America became Saudi's bodyguard. During President Trump's administration, a new term was born: fake news. The American president raised a claim that what he referred to as liberal media is biased. That claim was widely regarded as purely argumentative, however, it is somewhat accurate. News agencies cannot go against their bosses' directives. And Arab businessmen were owning more and more media business in America. Leading to Step 3, QUDS force. Iran realized that it must do something about the phenomenal success of their rivals, and fast. The Irani solution to the new Arab-American embrace was to relaunch with unprecedented ferocity their expansion plan into the neighboring countries. Using the one proven card that never fails: lead the Muslim crusade to liberate Jerusalem from the infidels. On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone launched a missile attack on a convoy in Iraq, killing the Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani, who was the commander of the Quds Force, one of 5 branches of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The command over the Quds Force made Soleimani the second most powerful person in Iran, according to Western sources. What is the Quds Force that gave him so much power? And why did America hit an Irani general in Iraq? The Quds Force literally means the Jerusalem Force, or more accurately, the Jerusalem Liberation Army. Why did the Irani second most powerful person call his militant force Jerusalem? Iran never had any relation with Jerusalem in its history. Iranian forces, or citizens, never had any claim to as much as an inch of Israel. The answer is, of course, to invoke the new crusade against the non-Muslims of the Holy Land. The pigs and dogs, as they call them. The first are the Jews and the latter refers to the Christians. Both hated pretty much the same. The Quds Force is the Irani answer to Saudi power in the West. It is a proxy army, meaning a local militia of insurgents, recruited, trained and armed by Iran. Their mission is to flame a civil war that will tear the host country apart from within, wicking it till it's ready to be taken over by the Irani, Shia-controlled puppet government. That was the fate of the Gaza Strip. Hamas, which is an Irani proxy, took over in a democratic election, then abolished democracy, replacing it with a strict Sharia-based government. Hamas declared war on Israel, even though Israel completely withdrew from every last inch of the Gaza Strip. They target civilians in frequent missile attacks, thus trying to flame a rebellion among Israeli Arabs to overthrow the Israeli Jewish rulers. That strategy had little success so far. It mostly led to the death of thousands of Palestinian youth, who were used as pawns in Iran's plan. The same fate came upon Lebanon. Hezbollah, which is also an Irani proxy terror organization, members of the QUDS endeavor, not a part of Lebanon's army, brutally took over southern Lebanon, launched the Second Lebanon-Israeli War. That devastated Lebanon, with nothing to gain from it. Now, Hezbollah attempts to provoke Israel into a third Lebanese war, which would bring endless suffering to the Lebanese people, and nothing to gain from it. Irani proxy are active in Syria, Yemen, Iraq and other nations, trying to implement Iran's plan to take over, after a civil war destroyed the host country. The drone attack that was ordered by Donald Trump came as retribution and deterrent to QUDS force, after attempting to expand their activities into America, turning the U.S. into their latest host country. That assassination most definitely postponed their plan to base the U.S. as a host. But history shows that it won't be for long. It is almost certain that new terror cells are formed in America at this very moment. It was Iran's attempt to undermine the Iraqi tyrant Saddam Hussein that gave him the pretext to invade Iran in 1980. That sparked the Iran-Iraq War. Eventually, Saddam was backed by Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in an attempt to weaken Iran. However, that plan backfired since Iraq was virtually bankrupt after that war, a status that would lead to the two Gulf Wars and the destruction of Iraq. Eventually, Iran succeeded in taking over Iraq as well, by using their civil war strategy. This Irani method, to inject civil chaos, would lead to the third step, in the forming of the anti-American axis. Step 4. China. The Republic of China is a miraculous success story. China boosted its economy at the end of the 20th century, quadrupling their export earnings in less than 3 decades. Prosperity led China to seek assurances for their good fortune to continue. For that, they embarked on an investing shopping campaign in order to establish their hold over foreign infrastructures, much like Britain, France, the US, and Russia did for decades before them. They needed a way to secure their shipping routes, but much more urgently, they needed to establish a stable source of oil. China realized early on, like Japan during the 1930s, their Achilles heel is their dependency on Western-controlled oil. Make no mistake, that is a major concern. In the 20th century, that pushed Japan into attacking Pearl Harbor, and almost succeeding in conquering the entire Far East. China chose a different approach, yet not much less aggressive. Unthreatened by the West, due to the weakness displayed against Iran, China began working on a plan to push aside America and Europe as world leaders. The crisis in 2018, that followed President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, paved the way for China to step in as the new Irani patron. Suddenly, from a country fighting for its survival, Iran became a powerful global player. The threat of American embargo became empty, since China is now committed to buying their oil from Iran. With Chinese money and lack of policing by America or Europe, Iran accelerated the creation of terror infrastructures across the Middle East, reaching from Persia, through Iraq, Syria and Lebanon, all the way to the Mediterranean coast, outflanking the Gulf states and Israel. Why did the Chinese-Irani alliance fail? These events should have been sufficient to bring the end of American influence in the region. Switching its global role with China as world leader, the Chinese plan should have worked. The entire Near and Far East should have already become the property of China and Russia, which are close allies since the Cold War. With the Middle East in their palm, Europe is no more an obstacle. America should have been out already. So what went wrong? Well, most importantly, Russia did not play along. However, the Russian Federation didn't block them either. For their own reasons, the Russians decided to seat this one out. Still, with Russia out of their way, they had enough power to push their plan. But they were wrong. Strategically, they failed to understand America's strength. Tactically, they failed exactly where all others failed before them, during the 20th century. They couldn't secure the base of Middle Eastern dominance, which is Jerusalem. Despite phenomenal efforts to attack Israel from all sides, destroying the Palestinian people in the process, along with Lebanon and Syria. Not only that, Israel did not lose that battle. They were able to strike back, with interest. Just as bad, Israel didn't switch sides. Even during the Obama administration, which was considered a low point in American-Israeli relations. For that matter, neither did the Saudis. To make things worse for the Axis nations, thanks to President Trump's backing, Israel increased its efforts to spoil repeated attempts by Iran to establish a hold in those nations. Mysterious explosions erupted all over the Middle East, even as far as Iraq, destroying weapon depots, killing key personas, and wiping whole strongholds off the face of the earth. Iran blames Israel for these, yet was never able to show any proof. Most impactful were the mysterious strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. Not just the demolition of Iran's alleged nuclear facilities. All 5 major Iranian atomic scientists were assassinated by an unknown agency. Even worse, more than 1,000 centrifuges were put out of use permanently, due to what was labeled later as the most sophisticated cyber attack in history. It is estimated that without those anonymous attacks, Iran would have achieved nuclear capabilities by now. Israel never responded to the allegations that it stands behind these actions. The repeating failures of Iran to establish a bridgehead for China's control over the world's economy by owning the Persian Gulf, all due to the American stronghold called Israel, made Iran realize they cannot do it alone. This led to the 5th and final step in the forming of the anti-American axis. Step 5. Turkey. The final component of the plan falls in place as Turkey finds itself out of the European Union. Iran and China are not the only countries with an expansion plan. There is another major power that was left out of the exclusive Western club. Although Turkey is a member of NATO, they are not members of the European Union. Turkey applied to join the EU as far back as 1987. However, the Europeans claimed that due to severe civil and human rights violations, including towards immigrants and civilian freedoms in general, Turkey will have to do a deep reform in order to qualify. This huge and powerful country, easily the biggest military force in the Middle East till 2010, and one of the biggest in the world, period, couldn't cash in on its great strength. Until finally, President Erdogan decided that it will be best to leave the Muslim world with its vast riches and influence, instead of begging the West for crumbs. His plan was to base his rule on the more conservative and nationalist parts of Turkey, which are also devoted Muslims. He visioned to return and fulfill Turkey's historical role as the leader of the Muslim world, as it was in the days of the Ottoman Empire. For that, Erdogan will use the only card that can bring him the title of Sultan: the conquest of Jerusalem. This new strategy would lead to a complete 180 degrees reversal in the Turkish-Israeli relations, from open allies to bitter rivals. Also, Turkey found a new power to help them in their quest: Iran, the ruler of the Gaza Strip, which unfortunately, to the people of the Strip, they will become the instrument for Erdogan to be used as a human battering ram against Israel. It started with anti-Israeli and anti-Western speeches by Erdogan. In 2010, Israelis were shocked by the Gaza Freedom Flotilla incident, as 6 ships, led by the Mawi Marmara, attempted to break the Israeli blockade around the Gaza Strip. This peacekeeping flotilla carried medical aid to Gaza. However, as it was boarded by Israeli naval forces just before entering Israeli waters, the force was attacked with deadly weapons. The result was 9 dead activists and several wounded Israeli soldiers. This flotilla was sponsored by Turkey. It was an attempt by Erdogan to flame the nationalist emotions of Turkish extremists, as well as the Arab world. Thus, gain the pretext to move against Israel. Under the title of Savior of Gaza, Hamas, which is an Irani proxy, collaborated with Turkey in their fight against Israel. The climax was Turkey's backing of the violent 2018 Gaza border protests. And thus, the Chinese-Iran relations were extended to include Turkey as well. The China, Iran and Turkey axis is complete. Still, they must secure their conquest of Jerusalem in order for their plan of world domination to succeed. The China-Iran-Turkey axis. Implications on America and what is the post-American era. The lack of backing of Obama's administration led countries such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, India, Philippines and others to rely on themselves for protection. Japan, for the first time since World War II, began to develop a blue water navy, including aircraft carriers classified as flat-top cruisers, to avoid the ban on the Japanese Navy after the Second World War. India is buying weapons in billions from Russia, France, and other non-US providers to diversify their dependency. Relying on the US is no longer an option. Many nations began considering China as a new patron. But the saga is not over yet. A quick and surprising reversal from China's influence occurred as President Trump interfered. The Western influence deterioration process was reversed sharply in 2017 as American President Trump took office, pivoting the Obama administration's Middle East foreign policy. One of his first actions was to move against ISIS, which was Saudi's royal family's main concern at the time. Another major move by Trump was the withdrawal from the Irani nuclear agreement. Siding strongly with the Gulf states and against Iran, he also worked to establish trust in Asia by aggressively confronting North Korea. Many in the West, and even America, could not understand their president's obsession with Kim Jong-un. The reason was, of course, to show American allies and adversaries that the days of pleasing tyrants out of fear are over. America is back. One of the acts that showed Trump's attempt to block the anti-American alliance was the banning of Turkey from the F-35 program, forcing Turkey to choose between Russian weapons, which would enable Turkey to begin their journey towards Russian and Chinese influence, and the West. This act was one out of many sanctions against Turkey, Iran, and of course, the trade war with China. Those acts were the American attempts to fight back. Now, you probably better understand the motivation behind the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. America shattered to pieces the Axis nation's dream of conquering the Middle East. America owns Jerusalem. So currently, America is the landlord of the region. The tensions between China and the US around the South China Sea are a direct result of the Obama pleasing of tyrants policy. As China builds artificial islands in the middle of the ocean, claiming the entire region for itself, are indicators of the Chinese lack of deterrence by any foreign power. It is this mentality that President Trump was trying to abolish. Before China will take over the US as first global economy and first dominant superpower, China will be able to declare checkmate over the West after the completion of 3 factors. First, controlling the South China Sea shipping routes. That means 30% of the world's shipping and also the lifeline of Japan, Australia, the Philippines, Vietnam and other nations. Second, controlling the Persian Gulf's Hormuz Straits. That will grant China jurisdiction over 17 million oil barrels per day, which are 22% of the world's oil supply, translating into powerful political leverage over all the Gulf states including Saudi Arabia. Not to mention the pirates in the region that were almost eradicated, may return with a vengeance. Third, lastly, if China will complete its maritime strangle over the West, by backing Turkey's agreement with Libya to merge their economic water zones, and thus creating continuous territorial ownership, splitting the Mediterranean in two. The approach to the Suez Canal would be controlled by Turkey, a member of the Axis. Also, most of the oil supplied to Europe with it, with Turkey blocking the oil land pipeline and Suez Canal in the east, and Iran blocking the Straits of Hormuz in the south. The Gulf nations are completely blocked from exporting their oil anywhere. As I said, checkmate. Courtesy of Barack Obama's foreign policy. All they need to achieve is to conquer Jerusalem, or it all falls apart. Will Jerusalem fall? Trump's recognition of Jerusalem was a statement for the Gulf states not to lose hope in the face of darkness. Trump's last actions as president are to push the Arab-Israeli peace process. Not for his own ego as many claims, but for the prosperity of America in the future. Although Saudi itself will probably be among the last to sign. Don't make a mistake. Even a bird will not dare to fly in the Gulf region without Saudi consent. This is all a part of a master plan. The Gulf nations may be vulnerable to Chinese, Irani-Turkish influence, but Israel is not. Converging Israeli weapons technology and know-how with the Gulf's money is all it takes to stop the Axis plan and return American undisputed control into the region, along with the abolishment of horrific violence that plagued this arena ever since Obama's liberal peace revolution. All eyes are now pointed at the new American President Biden, to see if he will side with U.S. ally Saudi Arabia. Or will he try to please the tyrants of China, Turkey, and Iran?